This June, Walleye Weekend will celebrate 40 years in Fond du Lac. It all began in 1978, and quite frankly, was a festival that almost wasn't. Longtime Walleye Weekend supporter Terry Davis had an opportunity to interview Joanne Ward, who in 1976 was hired and in January of 1977 began her position as executive director of the newly formed Fond du Lac Convention and Visitors Bureau. One of the missions was to create a community identity to gain recognition in state guides and tourism calendars, as at that time, Fond du Lac was only known for its county fair. Here's part one of that conversation.
June 2018, Walleye Weekend will celebrate its 40th anniversary. With us today, Joanne Ward, who was part of the founding of Walleye Weekend, if you will, and getting it to Fond du Lac. Joanne, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Terry. Great to be with you.
We are honored to have you because we know you have lots of memories of the festival. Remind our listeners what role you played at that time and what position were you in within the Fond du Lac community when Walleye Weekend first became part of Fond du Lac?
Well, I was the Convention Bureau. That's where I worked. The Convention Bureau was established in 77. In 76, actually, and I started in January 77. And the board wanted to do something really, they wanted me to do all the tasks. They had 2 pages of it on conventions and tourism. But they also the overriding mission was to create an identity for Fond du Lac, to get us into publications and calendars and guides, and to be known for something other than the county fair, because that's all we had. And we had a very small budget. I think my budget at the time was like $50,000, and that covered all the operations and the salaries and the rent to the Association of Commerce building for our space and all the print material and audiovisual. So you know what I mean. We had very little money.
So
but anyway,
you had very little to work with. Now you were employed by the new Convention Bureau at the time, so it was a brand new job, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so the board of directors comes to you and they say, we need some identity here. We need something for Fond du Lac to be known for. Do you remember any of the members of the board that were instrumental in giving you that challenge?
Well, Bruce Stumbus was the real one. He was our president. And also on the board were, Bernie Shriners and John Bloodgood and Gene Winkler and Ray Christ, and we had city and county. But Bruce Stumbus was the person who was really passionate about creating an image for Fond du Lac. And he did that when we were even doing the interview. So
let me ask you this then. They give you this challenge, and where do you go from there? They say, hey, we want to be known for something. So where do you go? What do you do?
I started looking around.
All right.
I started looking around, and I always still was doing my job because I had a lot of things to do. But in June, Merck Cruiser announced that they were doing this national walleye tournament at the Pioneer Inn and Marina in Oshkosh, and that sounded terrific because it was our largest employer, and I thought, gee, if we could bring that to Fond du Lac, that would be it. So I asked the board if I could go after it, and they said, yes, that would be fine. Would they come along? No, they wouldn't be coming along. So I went to it, and there was, I remember Don Woodruff was the tournament director, and there were a couple of vice presidents from Merck there, Hamburger and Stevenson, and Judy Butler, who was in their marketing, and she had her 2 daughters. I really didn't know I didn't know the people, but I circulated around, and I asked the questions, and it really was a great spot to showcase their product because it was a lovely resort and a big marina, and they were just having a wonderful time. Well, they all told me that they weren't interested. Don Woodruff, the tournament director, I remember he patted me on the head and said Fond du Lac had no resort, and it was just impossible. There was no place to have it in Fond du Lac. So I came back to Fond du Lac, and I tried to locate the real decision maker. It took me a while, but I found out it was Brian Callahan at Merck Cruiser. See, this is a Merck Cruiser National Walleye Tournament.
Sure, it begins with a fishing tournament, you bet.
Yeah, and so anyway, he wasn't really interested. But finally, he gave in, and he said he'd walk through the park with me in November, because that was the only place we could really have it. So in November we went, and it had snowed, and so we were plunging around in the snow, and we went to Lakeside West, and he said no, he wasn't interested. And we went to the big hole in the lighthouse, He said no, he wasn't interested. And then we got to Fisherman's Point, and he said, well, maybe that would work. Well, okay, so I called Carl Jacobs, who ran the park, and I asked him if if he could measure and find out how deep the water was. And so he said he would, and he called me and said it was 1 inch. And it was 1 inch deep, and so that meant dredging.
Right, that's not deep enough, so you need to dig deeper.
No, it isn't for 300 boats.
Right. That will not work. So you first of all, you get told no, then you get told this probably won't work, and then you find out you have 1 inch of water to work with?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what happens next?
Well, then we had a meeting, and Tom Hurl said that he knew Hutter and Smith and Ahern had cranes, and all it would take was for me to rent a clam, and we could do it. So I went back to City Council. I had gone to them. I skipped that. I went to City Council first, and they said no, they had no money, and it was impossible. But anyway, so then I went back to City Council, and I said, if we got it done and we didn't have to spend their money, was it possible? And they said yes, but I'd have to get an Army Corps of Engineers permit. So they gave me, I got the paperwork, and I filled it out and sent it in, and nobody paid any attention to us. And finally, it's a long story, I won't, but anyway, I finally found out who their decision maker was, and I got in my car and went to Chicago and sat outside his door until he signed our papers. So now we had, we had possible dredging, and we were ready to go to the next step. The next step was we had to put the boat somewhere. And so I went to the park board and asked them if we could put in docking into the lagoons. They said absolutely not.
Another no, Joanne. I'm counting the no's.
No.
The obstacles I'm counting. I think we're up to 6 or 7, but keep going.
So anyway, so they said no. They said the only thing we could, if we did temporary docking, it might work if we had temporary, but nothing permanent ever. So I went to the Fond du Lac Boating Club, and that was Dennis Schmitz and, I'll think of his name, but anyway, David. Anyway, the two of them, and they had a meeting, and everybody discussed it, and they decided that they would help build a prototype. So we went off to Fleet Farm to get our boats and things, and they built the prototype. And I took it to the park board, and I said if they had agreed that they would do it, put it in on a temporary basis if the park board agreed to it. Well, the park board said okay if they took it in, put it in the weekend before, and if they took it out immediately after, they would say it was okay. So
that's a lot of work, isn't it, to put it in and take it out?
It is,
yeah.
And I think it involved their big fishing weekend that they had. It was in there somewhere. But they decided they're wonderful people. Incidentally, they're still doing it. I just think they're the most amazing. But they said they'd do it if I got everything donated. So Fond du Lac Lumber said if we got the tournament, they would donate the lumber for the planks, and Manowski said they would donate the welding, and Flaherty said they would donate the boats. So now we had the boating club, and we had the elements for temporary docking. So that was the next step.
So the temporary docking, did it? How long does a process like that even take?
It takes a weekend. We used to take them. I remember delivering dinner to them, and oh my gosh, I'd take Miss Fond du Lac to cheer them up. It was
well, that works.
It's a thankless job. It really is. But anyway, but they were wonderful, and they did it. So anyway, let's see now what was next.
So you have the temporary docks built. Now, by that point, how confident are you that this is actually going to happen as an event?
Not a clue. Anyway, but working forward. So anyway, at that point, we decided we'd do a festival around it, or propose a festival around it to just make it more interesting for Mercury. And so we had Bruce said he'd give his secret recipe. I remember from this Chef Chateau. He made fabulous fish fry, and he gave us his famous recipe for the world's largest fish fry, and he named it the world's largest fish fry.
So Bruce Strumbus you're talking about with that?
Sambas was amazing. Yes.
Yes. So he had the Chef Chateau restaurant in Fond du Lac, and he had the recipe for the beer battered fish.
Absolutely, and he gave it to the Kiwanis.
Right, and then they called that the world's largest fish fry.
He called it I love the way he thought. He called it the world's largest fish fry. That's what he named it. And then Ray Wiffler and Jim Sobel proposed a music program, and then I'm trying to think, Don Rabbit and Blackie from the fire department. I don't remember what Blackie's real name was, but anyway, Blackie from the fire department planned the junior fishing tournament. Then we had a talent stage proposed, and there's a long story about how the Sports Olympics came up, but anyway, Bob Bailey and Tom Ramo and Bruce came up with the plan for the Sports Olympics. And we put that all into a flip chart presentation, and I took it to Mercury and waited. And
what time of year was this? What time of year was this when you were going to be in front of Mercury?
This was at the end of December. I
Okay.
mean, we've been flying,
Okay.
Very fast.
And in the back of your mind, you're thinking you want to get this event 6 months later in Fond du Lac?
Yes, and I was holding my breath and thinking, how fast can we work? So anyway.
All right.
So
now it's the end of December, and you are in front of Mercury with your plan for this festival.
And in January 28th, I remember the day, it's emblazoned in my memory. January 28th, I received a letter at the Convention and Visitors Bureau that said from Brian Callahan, who said that Fond du Lac Convention Bureau had been awarded the tournament over Oshkosh.
Wow. What did you do that day? You had to celebrate. Did you dance on your desk or what? I mean, that had to be a crazy day for you. Seriously.
It was just amazing. Well, I think I was on the phone all day calling everybody that I knew, telling them, let's go. And so anyway, the newspaper, the radio stations, and you all announced it, and it was amazing. It was just amazing. 300 people from every walk of life in Fond du Lac came. They put down what they were doing, and they just came forward to help. They wanted to be a part of it. It was just spontaneous combustion.
You're listening to an interview with Joanne Ward, who was Fond du Lac's first Convention and Visitors Bureau director. Joanne ran the Bureau until 1999, when she moved to her current residence in Florida. She'll be a part of a very special Walleye Weekend 40th Anniversary Parade in Fond du Lac on Friday, June 8th at 2:30, beginning at 9th and Main Street and going all the way to Lakeside Park. This parade will also recognize past Walleye Weekend co-chairs, Merck National Walleye champions, and others involved in the festival. Here's part 2 of her conversation with Terry Davis.
All of these names you mentioned earlier, do you think anyone had any idea what was going on at that point? Did they really think, well, this is going to be with us for a long time, this is going to be something that people come home to, this is going to be what Fond du Lac is known for? Do you think anyone at that time really believed that the festival would be where it's at today?
Yes, I think Bruce and I did, but that was it. No, I don't think anybody else. They were just doing it. They were just excited about it. But anyway, so then the dredging started, and Ahern trucks started hauling away the silt. And everything started flying. And Community Theater agreed to do the television public service announcements. And I remember Paul Kessner and Bob Schaefer from MPTC filmed them, and I sent them to every TV station in the state and all over northern Illinois. And we had service clubs. They planned all their food specialties. We talked a lot about restaurants versus service clubs, and decided the service clubs would put the money back into the community. So we chose the service clubs for food. Then we decided we'd have a blessing of the fleet, and I'm trying to think, the Rod and Gun Club came forward to guard boats, and Kevin and his crew of explorers said they would do the gates and entry. And Dale Fridley, bless his heart, he handled building and grounds for the opening years. And
that is a serious challenge to this day. The buildings and grounds people they don't get enough praise because they work so hard.
No, it was just, he was just amazing, and the others that have followed have been as well. And I can remember headquarters. Mary Lou Sofa was involved with that, and Alice Pickard, and Claire and Marianne Wetstein, and a number of others. And I can remember the Lighthouse Anglers. We decided we wanted to do an appreciation dinner for all these people who were just stepping forward to help us. And so Lighthouse Anglers agreed to fillet the fish. And we tried to make that as cheerful as possible. I remember getting Miss Fond du Lac and Judy Butler and we all went out there and filleted fish. For the first number of years, actually, we filleted the catch for the appreciation and just kind of prayed that we'd have enough fish.
Wow, I do recall some of that, but I wanted to ask you as we circle back, now that you know you have a festival and you have these volunteers, now you got to go and get some figureheads that are going to be in the trenches, yet kind of known in the community. So you select your first chair people of Walleye Weekend, and how did that come about, and who were they?
Well, Bruce was our president of the Convention Bureau. It was he was the driving force behind it, so he was going to be the chairman. And when we met Tom Hurl, I'll never forget when he said, well, let's just ask Cutter and Smith and Ahern if we could use their cranes. I thought, boy, this is a man of vision. So Tom became co-chairman. And both of them co-chaired it for the first 2 years. They were a terrific team, just a terrific team.
Which is kind of fun to know because about 20 years later, Tom's son, Mike, was the chairperson of the festival, which is kind of, that's 20 years ago already. So here we are in year 40. Year number 1, it was Tom, and then year 20, it was his son, Mike Hurl, who chaired the festival. There's a long list of chair people that have been involved with the festival. We can't get to all of them, but certainly many kudos goes out to them as well. So now you have this festival. You have your chair people. How did you arrive on the date? Was that dictated by the Mercury tournament, or how did that work?
Well, it was influenced by that. We decided we'd take it the second weekend in June and we'd make it permanent so people didn't get confused, and we'd have it second week in June forever. And so we did that together.
Now, early on in the festival, there was a contest to be the Walleye Weekend Queen. What did that all entail?
Well, that was Bernie Ludwig, and he ran that. And we had a queen contest, and they had buttons, I remember, and we had. I'm trying to think. Bernie Ludwig. I saw his daughter. I think it was last year when I was shopping in Fond du Lac, and we were talking about that because she was the Walleye Weekend Queen one year. We also had a representative from each of the JC groups around the Lake Winnebago because he wanted to create a good atmosphere with Lake Winnebago and our neighbors. So we had a person from each one of those communities one year as candidates for the Queen. And I'm just thinking, Jean Graff named it Walleye Weekend. I remember she worked in our office part-time as a secretary. She'd been in advertising. And we said, what are we going to call this? And she said, well, let's call it Walleye Weekend. And we all thought that sounded terrific, so that's how it became Walleye Weekend.
That is awesome. Just a part-time employee named the festival?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's great stuff. Jean Graff. There's a great trivia question. Jean Graff named the festival Walleye Weekend. Okay, so now you got your chair people, you got your event, you call it, what are you going to call it? You're going to call it Walleye Weekend, and you have this date picked, and it's in June, it's with the tournament. So now the festival's getting closer. What kind of challenges did you face? Because you had to educate the community about what this is going to be. Now we all know what it is, but how did you educate the community on what it was going to be?
I went right to Tom Ramo, and I said, I want a big fish with every person, every kind of artwork representing everything we're going to do at the festival, holding up that fish. And don't you remember the happy fish with all he had a chef, and he had an artist, and he had a this and a that.
He had a guitar. He had a guitar, right?
He had everything.
Yes.
It was just so darling. I still have one. I'll have to bring it when I come. But anyway, it was just a terrific way to show that it was a lot of fun. And he did a number of posters for us over the years, and he was kind of, I don't know, he had that wonderful little sense of humor about him, and he captured the sense of fun for the event. And then, of course, we wrote lots of news releases. Remember when we had, Taco Tuesdays, and oh my goodness,
Sure.
Everybody, all the radio people, Harley, Tony, Bob Carew, Scott, we'd all meet on Taco Tuesdays and we'd brainstorm. I remember we had so much fun doing that. That was great. But anyway, we sent out. Then I used his Happy Fish on the outside of all our catalog envelopes, and I sent news releases all over the Midwest. And it worked.
Now, you mentioned to me, Joanne, that national television news picked up on Walleye Weekend in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. How did that go about, and when did that happen?
Well, let me just go back. The first year we had 5 national magazine articles, 175 newspaper articles, and 1 documentary from TV from WLUK. I remember that. That's just emblazoned in my memory because I thought that was pretty good.
That's a lot.
I'll tell you how it happened, because we had, we always have a contest for some silly thing, but we'd involve the anchor people or the weathermen from Green Bay and Milwaukee, and they all came in with their big rigs, remember, and they broadcast directly to the station from they put up all their equipment. Well, anyway, they took lots of film of the weekend, and then I took it to MPTC and clipped it, and I sent it off to whatever their affiliated station was. So, in other words, I sent it to Today Show and Good Morning America and places like that, and they used it. In fact, I'm trying to think, Good Morning America used to call me. The interns used to call and say, "Do you have any more material for us?"
Isn't that something? Oh, that's awesome.
We sent him clips on all of our special events as time went on. It was really terrific.
Rewind the clock then, Joanne, if you can, to the very first Walleye Weekend at Lakeside Park. What can you remember about that, if anything, that was different or specific to that is going to create great memories for you?
As you're learning today, there are quite a few roadblocks in gathering the support needed and approval to bring this festival to Fond du Lac. Joanne was instrumental in the building of the Merck Cruiser National Walleye Tournament in June of 1977, which was, at that time, in Oshkosh. The Fond du Lac Convention and Visitors Bureau was awarded it on January 28th of 1978. From there, Joanne and a long list of volunteers established and produced Fond du Lac's first Walleye Weekend Festival in the second weekend of June, 1978. It was the Merck Cruiser National Walleye Tournament in 1977 and 78, and became the Mercury Marine National Walleye Tournament in 1979. And now on to our final part of a 3-part conversation between Joanne Ward and Terry Davis.
Well, I remember I'll tell you, there was a weather prognosticator in Green Lake. He was a baker, and he told weather patterns by the fog. And I saw an article in the Tribune, so I thought, oh, that's neat. I'll call him up, and he'll tell us it's wonderful weather, and then I'll have something to publicize. Well, I did call him up, and he called me back a few weeks later, and he said, I don't have good news for you. He said, weather's not going to be really good. He said, I think it's going to rain that first day. And
how many days, Joanne, excuse me, how many days ahead of the festival was that? Was that a couple of months beforehand?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
It was just about that.
So you're calling him in April and asking him for the June forecast. Okay, I get it. Go ahead.
And then I wasn't sleeping very well, and so I called Bruce, and I said, Bruce, I want to tell you this. And he said, well, let's fix it. So we had a meeting. We had a meeting with Bob Bailey and with Tom Ramo, and we created the Sports Olympics. And the Sports Olympics, I don't know if you remember them. It ran for a number of years, but it was, I'm trying to think, Wendy Powers and Linda Chandler worked on that, and so did Jim Pennell from Pepsi from Oshkosh. He was the sponsor for it. And it was great fun. Second year or third, we had George Bamberger come. He had an egg toss, but I remember we had the log rollers compete, and we had then we went on to have the Hayward lumberjack champs. But it was the kind of thing that really required kind of a muddy, messy affair. And if it didn't rain, they had a sprinkler system as a backup. And so that's one thing I remember. That was a unique thing that was born that first year.
So let me ask you this then. How was the weather during the first festival at Walleye Weekend with Lakeside Park?
It was good one day, and it wasn't so good the first day.
All right. So, but
I can think back to times when the weather was so fancy that the Exchange Club tied a truck to their tent to hold it down. So
There's been some crazy weather at Walleye Weekend over the years. One probably just a couple of years ago, maybe 3, where the porta potties were rolling down the street on their own, and it was just a nasty, nasty Friday night. That's just 3 years ago now. I believe that happened at Lakeside Park as part of Walleye Weekend. So now that you did you have a 2-day festival right away? Was it Saturday, Sunday?
It was.
It was Saturday, Sunday. And you worked with the city the park was only open until 6 o'clock early on, right?
Yeah, we were very careful about that. Yeah.
So
in the first few years, and then it got more festive, and then it got too festive, and then Bob Carew was chairman, and he created Family Land and brought it back to a more of a family festival. So it's had its moods.
Sure. So now you've got the first one booked, and you did that, and were you satisfied? Did you think you're on the right track? Were you excited? Tell me what happened after the first Walleye Weekend.
I was so happy, I can't tell you, because immediately we were in every publication, and it said that Fond du Lac hosted Walleye Weekend, and it said that we were interesting and fun, and big things happened there. And it helped me in my job, because it helped me not only to create a reputation for the community, but it helped me create a sense of pride in the people that I went. When we were out trying to bid on, let's say, the firefighters or the county execs or the Kiwanis or whatever it was. When I first started, my first year, nobody really wanted to bring people to Fond du Lac. They wanted to go somewhere else. It was sad.
Yeah, I'll say.
And by the time Walleye Weekend was coming, they had a new sense of community pride. It was really a wonderful thing to watch. It was really great because it was internal as well as external. Just was something to be proud about.
What?
It was our civic celebration, the biggest thing we were going to ever do, and we were going to do it as well as we could for as long as we could.
And Walleye Weekend now is stretched to 3 days. There was a short time when it was actually 4 days. I think it may have lasted maybe just 1 or 2 years, but that becomes a very serious strain on volunteers. But there are just so many volunteers that put this event together, so many sponsors that are critical to the festival. But Joanne, in your heart of hearts, and you look back at the history and how Walleye Weekend has evolved as a community festival, what do you think this event means to Fond du Lac as a community?
Well, I think in the beginning, we felt it was a tourism event because that was what I was working for as a part of my job. And we counted license plates, and we'd have 10% out of state and so on. I think it's evolved into an enormous reunion for the community where everybody seems to want to come back and connect with their old friends at Walleye Weekend. And so I think that's a part of it, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, that's what I am asking, because I think you're exactly right, because it started as tourism, but now you have to admit it has put Fond du Lac on the map with a lot of people outside, because you can get into a different city. You can be traveling, whether it's to Vegas or to Minneapolis, and you can mention Fond du Lac, and many times they'll say, "Oh, Walleye Weekend." I mean,
right.
that is a pretty big deal, considering how it all began and how you had all of these challenges on the front end of this thing. I think many people don't know about that. You kind of got stopped in your tracks many times over, and you kept digging in until you got the answers that you looked for and you wanted. I just hats off to you, Joanne. I know you're a pretty humble person, but at some point somebody's got to say thank you, Joanne Ward, and I'm going to do that right now. Is that okay?
Thank you, Terry. That's very sweet of you.
One other comment, Joanne always treated the media well, so we appreciated that. You always took very good care of us, and I think it was a great relationship that we always had with the Convention Bureau. We still do, but it was the beginning of a lot of good things to come back in the late 70s when this thing all got out of the gate with your crew and Bruce and Tom Hurl and you, Joanne, and so forth. It was kind of some great minds who put the Walleye Weekend together and made it the festival that it is today. And combining, really, the Merc tournament really is what really was the backbone of this event, correct?
Absolutely, and that's the most important thing. It was the catalyst. And it was the Merc Cruiser National Walleye in 77 and in 78, and did not become the Mercury Marine National Walleye until '79, whereas Walleye Weekend started in '78.
All right. Well,
But,
Go ahead.
There's so many good stories. Sometime, if you ever have time, there are just so many wonderful stories about the weather, funny ones that came out interesting, or about the Milky Way with when Lindsay built his boat out of 40,000 milk cartons, and we got in the Guinness Book of World Records, and so many wonderful stories about the things that have happened along the way that have made people laugh and smile and proud, and that have made us well known, in many different articles across the country. I used to get clippings from Arizona, from here, there, and everywhere. And then the fishermen, wherever they were from, there was always publicity from their hometowns, and there was just a lot generated of interest from it.
Joanne, thank you for being part of all of this. We look forward to seeing you in the Walleye Weekend 40th anniversary celebration here, the second weekend of June at Lakeside Park. And I know we could talk for hours about the festival, but this is just great information. I'm sure our listeners appreciated hearing from you.
Oh, and Terry, don't forget all the wonderful coordinators over the years. I mean, we started out with a number of them, and then we started Fond du Lac festivals in '81, and they should all be recognized. I mean, to Leanne today, and Jennifer, and throughout the years, I mean, Melissa Sparkey and Mary Ann Wetstein and Jill Cappings. They've all given a great deal to the success of it.
Yeah, Marianne Dilling, of course, in that list. Jennifer Holzman. Let's not forget that Kathy Wollersheim is on that list of past directors of Fond du Lac festivals and Walleye Weekend. And, of course, our current director, Leanne Doyle, all getting it done at Fond du Lac Festivals, Inc., and they got a big gig. It's a tough job, but you need to be well organized. Trust me on that one. So, Joanne, thank you for being with us. We look forward to seeing you in June.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Joanne Ward, she was the executive director of the Convention Bureau in Fond du Lac at one point, and has so many stories to tell us about Walleye Weekend. I think we could talk to her forever. I really enjoyed that conversation. Of course, Walleye Weekend comes to Fond du Lac's Lakeside Park for its 40th celebration on June 8th, 9th, and 10th. For more information, you can go to walleyeweekend.com.
A special thanks to Joanne Ward for sharing such an amazing timeline on Walleye Weekend's history. Your opportunity to share your Walleye Weekend memories is coming soon. As part of the 40th anniversary, there's a Walleye Weekend Memories Contest where you'll be able to share your festival memories through social media and local radio stations. And you'll even have the chance to dress like it's 1978 on Friday, June 8th. Keep listening to this station for more details or go to walleyeweekend.com. See you June 8th, 9th, and 10th as we celebrate Walleye Weekend's 40th anniversary.